My name is Catherine Reinhart, and I live in Ames, Iowa. I work with a lot of abandoned textiles, and so I primarily make fiber art, and then in the past 5 years, I've been doing a lot of socially engaged work or social practice work, and so those are community collaborations, which fits into the history of textiles too, and the history of quilt making. So recently, the sort of themes I've been working with are labor, connection, and care, and so I'm really interested in using forgotten or abandoned textiles and then sort of disassembling them, reassembling them, and turning them into fine artworks. How do we attribute value to things? How do we value and support people who are in caregiving positions? And I think that comes too from my experience as a mother. So in motherhood, I do a lot of work around the sort of unknown, unseen labor of motherhood. So I'm really interested in those sort of contemporary themes of labor and alternative models for care work. How can we shift the value and the economy to take care of people who are really doing important work?
Hi. I'm Lindi Roe, and I live in rural Iowa, outside of a town called Panora, and I am delighted to share a little bit about my work in SDA today. I thought I would show you how when I use trees as an inspiration for one of my fabric sculpture, it starts with chicken wire and mud and strips of cloth, and I would demonstrate, but I always get the stuff in my hair, and I'm trying to look better today. As I continue, I was going to show you how the skin of my sculpture is made, and it's a chenille technique. And what I do is I have up to 7 layers of fabric that I sew lines in, and you can see a pattern where I'm trying to replicate bark. And then between the lines, I take a handy seam ripper and I just decide how many layers I'm going to expose. And then this will become the skin of my tree sculpture. And I will next show you a completed one. Okay, this is one of my finished sculptures that you will be seeing in the exhibition that I am so proud of. And the other thing that I want to tell you is I'm so proud to belong to the Surface Design Association. Being an artist that lives in rural Iowa, it's difficult sometimes to find people that really want to talk about how many layers of chenille should you make for a tree. And so I have found friendship and support through this organization that has made me grow as an artist. So thank you, SDA.
Hi, my name is Jenna Bonistalli. I currently live and work in Los Angeles, California, although I spent the better part of the past 5 years in Iowa City to be exact. Where I was attending graduate school and then stayed along afterwards for a bit. I am an interdisciplinary artist. I work a lot in handmade paper, in clay, as well as in hand embroidery and weaving. Non-traditional weaving, more tapestry weaving, and working on large installation pieces and frame looms. A lot of my work does incorporate either sound or video or light in a sculptural sense and in the site-specific installation setting, oftentimes outdoors, and very much so taking inspiration and grounding in the natural world. I've spent a lot of time doing research about sanctuary spaces as well as preserved sites for various plants, animals, and other types of ecology and wildlife. I was an artist in residence at Iowa Lakeside Lab for 2 consecutive summers and spent a lot of time doing research there as well as other field work and recording. I've been a member of Surface Design Association, and I'm thrilled to be part of this group and part of these upcoming shows.
I think of myself as a sculptor. I'm an interactive sculptor. When I graduated from the Art Institute with my master's degree, I was diagnosed with a degenerative eye condition, and they told me that within a couple of years I could be blind. So I was kind of forced to really reconsider my future as a visual artist. Like, what does that mean? And what does it mean for a visual artist to lose their sight? And what kind of work would I start making? So I taught myself, or started teaching myself how to read Braille, and started incorporating that into my work. I embroider Braille onto my soft sculptures so that it has a tactile quality and it invites touch and interaction.
Hi, my name is Jocelyn Chateauvert. I live in Mount Vernon, Iowa. This is my studio. It's housed in a former school. I'm a hand paper maker. I pursue integrating structure into the sheets that I make by hand to make organic forms of sculpture.
I'm Jan Friedman. I'm a weaver and a fiber artist, and you're going to get a small glimpse of my studio. This loom I use for weaving tapestries, and currently I have it warped up ready for a project, but I have not nailed down the design, so I'm not going to start quite yet. I had originally started as a painter, and it's just so easy to go from one color to another in painting, so I had to come up with a plan how I could use that in weaving my tapestries. So I'll start with 10 to 11 threads, thin threads, and then I'll wind that into a ball. And then I'll drop one of the lightest colors, and then I'll add a slightly darker one. So I continue that process till I go from this, pale yellow to a wonderful dark blue. And I'll use this as my palette, and sometimes I'll just go from this green, pale green, to this darker green. So I use these often. I also like to incorporate texture in my piece in some of the tapestries that I do. So I'm using China silk. I dye it and then I rip it, and as I'm weaving I just bring a little bit to the surface. It's a bubbling technique, and then to really lock that down I have to do a couple rows of the yarn. In both my collages and my tapestries, nature is my muse, and with the climate change problems that we've been having, over the last couple of years I've been doing pieces addressing that issue. So here's a collage I'm working on. It's called Wishes for the Planet, and this will be number 10 when I finally come to its conclusion. But I just wanted to show you some of the elements I'm using. So I'm using the sunprint fabric that I did, and I do these dyed and woven bands. I use them often in my collages. I use them to help sort of move your eye through the piece. I'm using twigs and leaves. I use a lot of leaves. And then I use silk organza. I like to use it because it's great transparency. Here's some paste paper, here's some fabric, and then let's end with this wonderful bee, because we all know bees are vital to our survival.
Hello, my name is Deb Zeitler. I live in Iowa City, and I started weaving about 30 years ago. Currently, I work from 2 family rooms in my home, and these are 2 of the looms that I use. I do have 4 looms, and each loom I use for a specific purpose. I weave both functional items and art pieces. Since I've been weaving, I have also worked on other fiber arts, and I'd like to show some of that to you now. This is the newest acquisition to my so-called studio. It's an industrial sewing machine that I can sew significant pieces of leather on. I like to make shoes incorporating both leather and fiber. And with this machine, I'll have a broader spectrum of what I can do with my leather pieces. I do make sneakers out of leather, such as these, but soon I hope to be able to make more complex leather shoes, leather lined with leather soles, like these that I made in my teacher's studio. I also do a fiber art called ply split braiding, where I make three-dimensional small basketry type items like these out of cotton cords in a braiding technique. So those are some of the things that I do with fiber arts, and I hope you'll enjoy seeing at the show here today.
My name is Olivia Valentine, and I'm an artist based here in Des Moines, Iowa. I use a lot of different materials and media, but a lot of my research starts with textile construction. I'm thinking and often looking at the edges and spaces between things. I usually think of most of it as drawing, whether it's a material drawing or a photographic drawing, or one that's done with pencil and ink. Just recently had a show at the Des Moines Arts Center where I was working both at a very large scale and then at smaller scales, both in a highly vertical environment and then really horizontal. The genesis of that show, in many ways for me, was thinking about actually just the space of the museum and thinking about the Pei galleries and their really horizontal expanses versus the Meyer galleries with that really strong vertical space there, and trying to make a relationship across the two of them. The first space I was actually interested in was those lower Pei galleries with the sculptures on the tabletops and thinking about that horizontal space. That said, when I first started proposing the show to them, it was like, well, working in Meyer would be quite natural for you and your work, and at first I didn't actually really want to go there at all. But as I thought more and more about it, I found that atrium wall to be a really interesting space and a really peculiar architectural situation where you have a wall that is also an object, and I wanted to actually draw attention to that. And so ultimately activating that wall and making it a surface that is not just a neutral space for holding or showing art was really the intention for that component of the installation.
Hello, my name is Astrid Hilger Bennett, and I'm in Iowa City, Iowa. I love to paint and print on fabric. I love to use them in larger wall pieces and as smaller functional items around a table of shared food. I do outdoor installations, and I make scrolls with small drawings that I do from nature. Most of my fabrics start out white, and I use chemical and natural dyes, and then collage, stitch, and draw on them. I love my tools. I love brushes, my silk screens, my large work table, and I love the outdoor world from which I get a lot of inspiration. I have a community art practice. My community indigo vat is one that I maintain and share with other people. And I also do a lot of mentoring and networking as president of Surface Design Association, a contemporary textile nonprofit. I believe in the power of creativity to help us solve some of the problems in our wider world. I hope you'll join me on my website and my Instagram feed. Thank you.
Shadows of Flight is a mixed media work inspired by the dance of flight. Some of the choice of materials came indirectly from solving an exhibition problem of another piece I was working on as I was trying to resolve a structural issue. That was when I first considered using screen. While working with the screen, I saw possibilities. I observed what happens when it's layered at different distances, what happens when other elements are incorporated or other materials or medium are applied to its surface, what happens when it's pulled away from the wall. Around that same time, I had the opportunity to display work at the Moline Airport in Moline, Illinois. They had these freestanding display cases that were around 4 by 4 by 8 feet, and I thought of them as glass jewel boxes. My original intention was to build a structure of hanging elements to be seen on all sides, but then I started to consider the screen. That is when I started building Shadows of Flight, with layers of hanging elements and layers one could see through. As it evolved, I sewed shadows on the screen, and then I added a layer of lightweight fabric to help with seeing the work, which allowed for more shadows, but also was translucent enough to allow for hints of what was on the other side. Since that initial installation, Shadows of Flight has been exhibited in several venues where it feels uniquely different in each of its surroundings, and each time I install it, I see new possibilities. I'm continuing to explore working with screen, and you can see some of this work on the SDA membership website.
I'm Tibi Chelcea. I live in Ames, Iowa. I'm originally from Romania, but moved to the United States about 20 years ago. I came to the United States to study electronics and computer science. Lately, I've been designing circuit boards as objects of art. I've been doing a lot of drawings based on CAD programs, computer-aided design programs for electronics. I've also done a lot of embroidery on circuit boards, kind of related to the history between the textile industries and the electronics industries. You know, one of my fascinations, or one of the things that I'm interested in, is history, and the history of objects and history of connections between things that don't seem to go together. There are lots of connections between the electronics and computer industries and textiles. Like, textiles were the first automated machines. I'm thinking of the core computer memories from the 1950s, which were extremely big, extremely expensive to make, and part of the reason why they were so expensive to make was because they were done by hand. That was one thing for the computers in the 50s that was never automated. For the embroidery pieces, those are a little bit more complicated. I design the circuit boards, send them for manufacturing, I get them back, and then I use, cotton yarn to embroider them. So yeah, it's a pretty laborious process. It can take months and months to kind of finish one of these pieces, between the time that I design it until I finish embroidering it.